1 week after 9/11, Congress passed the Authorization for Use of Military Force for President Bush to pursue those who had, quote, planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks. So not only al-Qaeda, but also the Afghan government for harboring Osama bin Laden. This provided the justification for the invasion of Afghanistan. But it didn't end there.
There are thousands of these terrorists in more than 60 countries. Our war on terror begins with al-Qaeda, but it does not end there. It will not end until every terrorist group of global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated.
Then there's the Covert Action Statute. Also after 9/11, Bush granted the CIA the authority to kill al-Qaeda targets around the world, citing the Covert Action Statute in Title 50 of the U.S. Code. This gave the CIA the same rules of engagement as the military, including the use of lethal force. The drone campaign would be used to assassinate targets, including in places outside of conflict zones. And lastly, we have the Security Cooperation Authorities. A couple important laws here. Title 10, Section 333 of the U.S. Code, also known as the Global Train and Equip Authority, and Section 127E, or ECHO, which has allowed the U.S. to create and control proxy forces fighting on their behalf or even alongside U.S. forces. The most notorious 333 mission was carried out in Niger in 2017. U.S. Army Special Forces of the 3rd Special Forces Group were ambushed by Islamic State of the Greater Sahara. They'd kill 4 U.S. soldiers and release their helmet camera footage as propaganda. What was very telling about this attack is how unaware Congress was about the U.S. presence in Africa at the time.
I didn't know there was 1,000 troops in Niger. We don't know exactly where we're at in the world militarily and what we're doing.
America's reach is astounding, and the U.S. currently has 333 train and equip programs in 56 countries. 333 missions are conducted on the premise of self-defense, and on this rationale, the U.S. has engaged in actual combat without congressional authorization. For example, you may be surprised to learn that the U.S. has spent $4 billion on a 333 program with the Philippines. In 2002, the U.S. would send 1,200 Special Forces officers to the country. They're stationed throughout the island of Mindanao in bases mostly unknown to the public. Ostensibly there to fight al-Qaeda affiliates, reports and interviews with other groups say they've seen Americans in full combat gear and have engaged in direct combat with them. Relations would be strained in 2015 when the U.S. planned and funded an operation involving a Philippine commando unit, which killed 44 officers. A fiasco that is little known in the U.S., but another conflict the U.S. is not so transparent about being involved in. So how many wars are we actually involved in? Well, it could be as high as 20, and it may even be more. Retired General and head of U.S. Africa Command Don Bolduc says that by 2017, U.S. Special Forces had seen combat in 13 African countries. There's also been hostilities, of course, in Syria, Yemen, and Pakistan, also Lebanon and the Philippines. Besides the Middle East, the largest active military presence in the world is in Africa, where there are at least 34 different military bases across more than a dozen countries. These bases are secret. The U.S. will only officially admit to having one base in Africa, Fort Lemonnier in Djibouti.
Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti is the only permanent U.S. base in Africa.
Because these bases often house drones and special forces units, they are shrouded in secrecy. For example, the U.S. government will not admit that U.S. troops engaged in active hostilities in Mali in 2015, 2017, and 2018. But the U.S. military is not only responsible for its own troops. The War Powers Resolution passed by Congress in 1973 is very clear that U.S. forces are engaged in hostilities when they, quote, command, coordinate, participate in the movement of, or accompany the regular or irregular military forces of any foreign country. Among the forces that the U.S. military has commanded and coordinated is the Rapid Intervention Battalion of Cameroon, or BIR, its French acronym. This unit was trained by the U.S. as part of a Special Forces partnership. They became world famous when they filmed themselves burning down a village and spraying bullets into a pile of women and children. Lucky for them, the Defense Department claims that 127 ECHO programs are exempt from oversight, and that the Leahy Law, which prohibits assisting forces who commit human rights abuses, doesn't apply to them. The 127 ECHO program with Cameroon ended in 2019, but they still receive support from the U.S. In fact, they're one of America's closest allies in the region. President Obama would send 300 Special Forces troops there in 2014, and they'd set up multiple drone bases, including Salak, which would be used by the BIR to imprison members of the Kanuri ethnic minority, including women and children, where they'd torture them using stress positions, suspension by ropes, water torture, sleep deprivation, extraction of fingernails, burning, and electric shocks. As recently as 2020, Cameroonian security forces had conducted a massacre in Garboux, killing at least 22 civilians in cold blood.
Responsabilité de l'armée et d'un groupe d'autodéfense impliqué dans le massacre des civils.
Cameroon continues its reign of terror, prompting members of Congress to write this pleading letter to President Biden in 2022, specifically mentioning the BIR. Over in Burkina Faso, U.S. Special Operations units have long trained the Burkinabe security forces, who have been implicated in mass extrajudicial killings. In 2020, 114 bodies were discovered buried in 14 mass graves in Djibo, in the north of the country. Other bodies were simply left exposed to the elements, a total of close to 200 people. Simon Compaoré, who served as internal security minister, would have this to say when asked about these killings. "We have to do everything to make sure we keep the morale up. We're doing this, but we're not shouting it from the rooftops." Burkina Faso has turned from one of the most stable countries in Africa to a failing state. In January of 2022, a U.S.-trained lieutenant colonel of the Burkinabe military would overthrow the government. He had participated in at least 6 U.S. military exercises. And he's not alone. Since 2008, U.S.-trained officers have attempted 9 coups in Africa and succeeded in 8 of them in West Africa alone. In Egypt, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who overthrew Egypt's first democratically elected president Mohamed Morsi, underwent basic training at Fort Benning in 1981 and advanced training at the U.S. Army War College in 2006. Egypt enjoys comfortable military support from the U.S. to the tune of about $1.3 billion a year. Evidence suggests that state security forces have engaged in forced disappearances and extrajudicial killings, which has also been documented on video. The number of those killed is disputed, and little reporting exists about it. In Afghanistan as well, before the Taliban took over the country in 2021, paramilitary units of the Afghan intelligence service, trained by the CIA, were embarking on a terror campaign across the country.
U.S.-trained Afghan Special Operations Forces hunting ISIS.
These U.S. and NATO-trained forces are among the best equipped and battle-hardened soldiers in the country.
In late 2018, Unit 01 entered a madrasa, a school for young children, and summarily executed 12 boys. They'd commit other school shootings, including in May of 2019, when they killed 6 children and dumped them into an irrigation ditch. In June, they throw grenades and shoot up another school, killing 9. Witnesses say they saw Americans with them. 01 is a unit that operates, as you know, in partnership with the CIA.
They are trained, funded, and actually under the control of the CIA.
We all know how things turned out in Afghanistan, and similarly in Africa, U.S. intervention hasn't made the region more stable, quite the opposite, even by the U.S. government's own admission. According to the Pentagon, the number of violent events across the continent has jumped more than 1,800%, from 288 in 2009 to 5,500 in 2021. Secret U.S.-trained paramilitary groups, militias, and battalions are still active throughout the world, and their crimes appear to only be seldom reported, especially by major news outlets. The reason for this is that Special Forces programs, such as the 127 Echo, are not only classified, but SCI, or sensitive compartmented information, the most secret of all secret material, allowing it to be shielded by regulators and Congress. The secret nature of these groups allow them to commit atrocities with impunity, and the full extent of what's happening, particularly in Africa and Asia, is surely far beyond what is available to the public. Certainly a case can be made to end these programs entirely, including 127 Echo and 333 of Title 10. Ending military aggression in Africa especially would surely increase economic stability and prevent further security degradation.